every platform that has a show.
Curly.
Set us up around and let's get started. And you can watch me kiss my own hand. Go from one to the next. Walk right out on that old check. It's gonna be alright, honey, 'cause I'm with the band. Say, where'd you get all that? I'd really like to know. Well, I'll show you mine if you just show me yours. We don't have to go. We'll head over here. Just lay it on that line and make it a deal. Come on over here, little miss.
Good evening, and welcome. My name is Kinnawa Kaitibi, and I am the owner of African Thunder Incorporated, leader of the Milk Drop, and also a board member of the illustrious SoundCorps. Now, look, we are here broadcasting live from the Bandwidth live streaming studio that has been taken over by SoundCorps for the last few weeks, and tonight we're here to talk about taxes. More specifically, if you're an independent musician and how to work on those taxes. Now, throughout the years, SoundCorps has worked with several musicians within the community. And more recently, you may have received direct assistance from the Chattanooga Area Musicians Relief Fund that has been brought about because of the COVID-19 pandemic. That means you may have received, or not may have, you have received the 1099 form. Now, many people may be wondering, what am I going to do with this form? Well, here's what we're here to talk about. I'm here with the professional, the money guru himself, Reed Bobo, who is the manager at Market Street Partners, an accounting firm right here in Chattanooga. Thank you so much for being here, Reed.
Thank you. Making me sound great.
Oh yeah, man. Look, you're awesome, bro. You keep us up to date. But look, let's jump on in, man. You know, and you look good. You know, Reed's got the nice collar on, whatnot. So we have a lot of musicians that are looking for this information. And I guess the first thing we need to start off with is, what is an independent musician?
So most obvious, you got to be a musician to be an independent musician. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're performing music. You could play some other roles in music, like if you're composing music, producing music, directing music, coaching an ensemble, teaching lessons. Those are all types of independent musicians that are going to be classed as independent contractors for taxation purposes. And some other things that you need to consider when you're trying to determine whether or not you're one of these independent musicians is, are you working for profit? Because to the IRS, there's a big difference between doing something as a profession for profit and having a hobby. And that makes a big difference as far as what you can do. Also, if you're doing this work and you're employed by a company and you receive W-2 wages, then you're not an independent musician, you're an employee. And the good news is your taxes are a lot simpler, but the bad news is you're not going to be able to take advantage of some of the tax reduction strategies that an independent musician will be able to take advantage of.
Oh yeah, thanks for clarifying that, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people had a question about the W-2 or even the 1099. So now looking at, for those independent musicians, can musicians take deductions like businesses do?
Absolutely, yes. So a business is going to have bookkeepers who by the end of the year will produce a profit and loss statement. And it's going to show all your revenues, all the money that you take in, and all the expenses that you have throughout the year. And then it's going to come out with a number at the bottom, your net income. And for a musician, you're not going to have to pay taxes on all the 1099 payments that you get throughout the year. So you're going to take deductions, just like all those expenses that a business has. You're going to be able to take those as a deduction from your revenue and come out to a net income number and pay taxes based off of that.
Okay. And now what expenses can musicians actually deduct?
Pretty much everything a business can deduct, and a few that normally a person wouldn't be able to deduct at all. So some expenses that are kind of personal expenses most of the time, musicians, they're going to use those for professional purposes. Like if you go to a concert, that might be entertainment for you. It might be industry research. So you're going to want to keep track of things like that, music streaming services, music purchases for anybody who's still actually buying physical albums. Those kind of things can be considered business expenses for musicians.
Okay. And now we talked about the expenses part. So there are some things that I guess some musicians or some people, even when it comes to like those expenses, such as buying food and things like that, can you write that off as well if you're an independent musician?
Yeah, to a point. You can't just consider every meal while you're sitting next to your instrument a business expense. For the purposes of 2020 taxes that we're filing right now, you're limited to 50% of business meals. And those can be meals with someone that you're doing business with in a business meeting. They can be meals while you're traveling. Pretty much if you're unable to eat the meal at home, if you are out on the road, that's going to be a business expense. 50% because the IRS says you've got to eat anyway, but we understand that there are some situations in which your meal is business related.
Interesting. So now that also even brings us to our next question. So not only in regards to, of course, food and meals or whatnot, but are there any limitations on these deductions in other expenses as well?
Absolutely. So meals, of course, 50% only this year. Part of one of these stimulus relief packages has, in order to promote restaurant business, they've decided to allow 2021 and 2022 deductions, I believe, to be 100% for meals. So there are going to be some advantages in future tax years that we don't have this year. Other limitations that you should think about are any of those expenses that could also be personal expenses. You don't want to deduct every concert ticket throughout the year because for sure some of those are going to be entertainment. If you're using a streaming service and you use that for a lot of kind of research, keeping up with industry trends, you'll want to allocate some of that to your business expenses and don't deduct the rest because you're probably going to be using that for entertainment on some level. Other things you can deduct, if you're on stage as a performer, you're probably going to have some concert attire that you wouldn't necessarily use as streetwear. That's going to be a deduction. Ooh. But it needs to be clear that it's performance attire and not just something out of your wardrobe that you're trying to deduct. And the same with makeup. For a lot of these performers wearing makeup, I don't think Kiss is wearing their makeup as streetwear. That's pretty clear cut. But if you're just wearing regular makeup and you're using it on stage, you need to allocate the cost of the makeup you're wearing to your business return and leave the other as a personal expense and don't deduct that.
Got you. So that's really just making sure you organize and really being specific about what is going where, especially in regards to like the makeup and things like that.
Absolutely. And the IRS says any expense that's ordinary and necessary for you to run your business can be deductible. They do specify that it shouldn't be lavish in any kind of way. So like I said, you can deduct concert tickets, but maybe not the VIP area.
Oh,
if you're paying for something that's above and beyond, that's lavish, that's not really deductible. So
helpful information right there.
Yeah, for sure.
So now, if the IRS did ask for those financial records, I mean, what should you have ready for the IRS?
Basic expenses, receipts, anything to prove that you actually did spend that money. Other deductions have some specific requirements that you should keep in mind.
Mhm.
And a major deduction that musicians should take advantage of is travel expenses and automobile expenses. So travel expenses, you're thinking more like hotels. If you have to go out of town for a gig and you have to rent a hotel room, that's going to be deductible. But if you're just driving to a gig, just the mileage to get there is deductible. And the IRS has a standard rate per mile. I recommend using that because it's way easier than keeping track of all your actual direct expenses like your gas, car repairs, anything like that, and allocating those to your business miles. Either way, you're going to want to keep a mileage log. It should have your beginning mileage at the beginning of the year, your ending mileage at the end of the year, and your beginning and ending mileage for each business trip. And you have to have that information to fill out the form if you're going to use that deduction. But it can add up pretty fast.
Okay. And now, how would they go about keeping those records? Would they need it written out, or do they need it electronically? How would they go about that?
Anytime that you have a paper receipt, you might as well just hang on to that. But if you're keeping a mileage log, it's not really going to have a specific requirement of, being on paper. You can keep digital records as well.
Okay. And now they need to have that for a certain amount of time as well.
Yeah, minimum 3 years. And that's 3 years after either you file your return or after you pay the taxes, whichever one is later.
Okay.
And that's the most basic statute of limitations for the IRS to take a look at your return. If you do anything illegal, there's no limit. So make sure everything you're doing on your return is on the up and up, so that you don't open yourself to any legal liabilities.
Right. But if it is legal, make sure it's between those 3 years. So 2021, you need to keep it until 2024 at least.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And now that brings us to our next question. So what can a musician do if they file their taxes and don't have enough to pay like a large tax bill that they may have, received?
There are two things you should think about in paying taxes. One of them is pay throughout the year. And for Schedule C, for independent contractors, there are 4 dates in the year. The 15th day after the close of the quarter. So the most recent one we had was January 15th. That would be when you would pay your tax liability for quarter 4 of the previous year. So, and that, to pay those, you kind of have to estimate what you're going to owe. That can be a little complicated, but the backup withholding that the IRS recommends for 1099 payments is 24%. And that's generally going to cover your liabilities. The other option, if you do get to filing season and you have a big tax bill, you can set up a payment plan with the IRS. You don't have to pay it all at once. They're going to charge interest, which is kind of unfortunate, but it's better than not being able to pay it all.
Yeah. And is there, I guess, a deadline for any reason if they do set up some type of payment plan or anything like that? Is there a deadline when they need to actually have that payment in full?
The later you pay, the more you're going to pay in interest and penalties.
Oh, okay.
But you do have a little bit of time before they start aggressively, pursuing you and trying to seize property or anything like that. So they're not going to do that right away.
Yeah.
You can talk to an IRS representative on the phone, and they'll even set up auto draft to collect the money, so you don't even have to worry about forgetting a payment.
Nice. Okay. And now, what advice, is there any other advice that you would like to, give musicians, especially during this tax time, or, even how to prepare before tax time as well?
Yeah. Better to keep your records straight throughout the year than waiting until tax time. Keep them all in the same place. Summarize your information so that you're not looking through a bunch of receipts trying to add them up at the last minute. Just keep a tally. And don't be afraid to take a stab at filing your own taxes. It can seem a little daunting, but there are really only a few forms that you need to look at to accomplish the task. All the forms are available as fillable PDFs from the IRS, and all the forms have a set of instructions with them as well. So you can read the instructions and figure out how to file. It's really not as hard as you may think it is. And we can show you what the forms look like. Of course, as an independent musician, there's no business return that's filed by itself. It's all part of your individual tax return. and that happens on Form 1040. Most of what you're going to do is going to show up on line 8. It flows through what's called Schedule 1. And Schedule 1 is going to have your net income from Schedule C, which we talked about earlier. That's that kind of profit and loss statement for your business, which is you as an independent contractor. You won't have filed for a business entity. So you're not an LLC, you're not an S corporation or anything like that. It's just you. So that's what's going to go on Schedule C. Essentially, Schedule C is 2 parts. You've got your revenue, your income in the top section, and Schedule C has several different places that it might be a little confusing when you're first looking at it, but there's only one that's going to be your gross receipts. It's line 1, and pretty much all the income you're going to get as a musician is going to be there, unless you're getting royalty payments or anything like that. So part 1 is income. Part 2 is all those deductions that we were talking about. And most of those are self-explanatory. You've got things like the advertising. You're gonna want to print some flyers for your show, make stickers to hand out, anything like that. That can be advertising. You've got a few things you're not going to use. Pretty much rule of thumb, if you don't know what it's talking about, it probably doesn't apply to you, because anything that you're doing as a musician, you should see it on here and it's going to ring a bell. Okay. A few different things you'll see on there that you're going to have to calculate would be car and truck expenses. And again, there's 2 methods to do it. Simplified method, definitely the way to go. It's just going to be easier and less error prone for you. There's also a home office deduction. And most musicians, I hope, are spending a little time practicing. And if you're using your own personal space for that in your home, you can deduct part of that space, not the entire space, because you still live there, but you can deduct part of that space on your turn. And that's another thing that adds up pretty fast as well. There's a limitation on that as well. Safe harbor, which is, again, simplified method. You're going to be limited to 300 square feet, but it's $5 per square foot. So that could be a pretty big money saver for you, and it can really reduce your net income to a much more reasonable level for you to be paying taxes on.
Goodness. And how would they report now, even with that, the square footage? Do they need to actually go in and, I guess, measure how much of that, or they?
Okay. Good question. You should be able to back it up with some kind of measurement. Okay. So you could say, well, this is the space that I use. Here's the total square feet. And if you're using the method where you allocate all your bills and your rent to that, it's going to be, just proportional to the total square feet. Basically, if you use that method, you're going to want to make sure that all your records from your personal expenses that go to your home are part of that. And they may not seem like business receipts because they're going to have your name on them, but they're going to be part of that record.
Got you. Okay. Man, that was so there's so much information that goes into it. But just like you said, I mean, even looking at the form, everything is literally written down. Yeah.
And there are a couple other things you should think about as well that are not quite as obvious. So you're going to see all these different categories. Most of them are going to make sense. Most of them are just going to ring a bell as far as like, okay, that's something I'm paying for, so I think I can put that on here. And as long as you're using it for your business, you're right. It's going to be able to go on there. The other expenses, they're not specifically outlined for you. So just have something to back it up, be able to show that it is a business expense and that you did actually pay for it, and you're going to be all right for that. Another thing that you should be aware of is when you're taxed as an independent musician, as an independent contractor of any kind, you pay what's called the self-employment tax. and it seems like you're paying extra tax, but what you're really doing is you're paying your Social Security and Medicare that a normal W-2 employee would have taken out of their paycheck. And you're also paying the other half of that normally the employer would be paying. So since you're your own employer, you do have to pay both sides. That seems like a real bummer, but you do get to deduct the half of that a business would normally pay for. So that's an expense that's going to be coming out of your income and reducing your taxable income. One other thing I will mention, as far as limits on deduction, SE deduction is half. There's one other deduction that's going to be majorly helpful. It's a new one. It's part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And essentially, when that act was passed, the corporate tax rate went way down. And to compensate other business owners who aren't a corporation, they made this special deduction for pass-through entities. So a lot of these LLCs that you hear about, they're pass-through entities. And that income is, to an extent, deductible up to 20%. And that's true for musicians as well. And that's going to go in a different spot on the return. It's going to go all the way on page 1 of the 1040. Right. So the very front page of the tax return. It does have its own form you have to fill out, but there's a simple one. And it looks a little confusing. It's called Form 8995.
Okay.
And there are only a couple other things on it. If you happen to have REIT dividends, real estate investment trust dividends, or any proceeds from a publicly traded partnership, those are the only other two things that you'll see on there that might kind of confuse you. If you don't have those, you can ignore those. And hopefully you'll know if you have those. If you have those through a brokerage, they're going to send you a form for that as well. So they'll notify you of what those numbers were.
Okay.
The limitation on that is pretty specific. There were certain industries that the IRS said, all right, you guys, you can take this up to around $163,000 for a single filer, and double that for if you're married filing jointly. So most independent musicians are either going to be highly successful, and they're going to phase that out over a $50,000 range, or you're going to fall under that threshold and you'll get to take the whole 20%. And that makes a huge difference. Yeah. 20%. If music is your main thing, that 20% is going to be a huge difference. Yeah. On top of that, you're still eligible for the standard deduction on the tax return. So you definitely want to take advantage of that and take a huge chunk out of your tax liability. Yeah.
And so let me ask you this. So even in regards to, I mean, there's a lot of layers that goes into it too. But let's just say if an independent musician ends up filing, I guess, maybe the wrong thing, or, puts it, how can they go about either fixing that, or, I mean, do they have to wait for a response back, or how do they go about with that?
Most of the time, it's going to have to be majorly wrong for the IRS to even take note of it. Gotcha. And you have to remember that they are the Internal Revenue Service, so their job is to collect revenue. So they're not going to send an agent out to audit you if you're not making enough money for them to actually recover. So they're going to try not to lose money. Sometimes they'll send out automated kind of like mail response audits, and all they're going to want is for you to provide the documentation and send it back.
Got you.
So that's if anything's going to happen, that's the most likely thing to happen. But you usually don't have to worry unless you're putting something absolutely, extravagant, ridiculous on your return.
Okay, makes sense.
So yeah, there's not a huge risk of you're not going to go to jail anytime soon for that. If it's just on the wrong line, like it's a deduction, maybe you put advertising expense on the commissions line, that's actually not going to affect your tax liability because they're deducted the same way. So that's not going to be a big issue either. Anything like that, small mistakes, really not a huge thing to worry about.
Awesome. And now they can also either file it themselves, or they can have someone else, like, let's just say, like, if someone wants to go to H&R Block or,
Right.
things like that, they can also go to those different places and file as well. Would you recommend?
Yeah, so you can file online.
Mhm.
You don't have to go to like one of those kind of shops that
Mhm.
does it. They're online service providers. The IRS has what they call the free file program now,
Okay.
and they want to make electronic filing accessible to everyone because it's easier. It's usually easier for you, and it's definitely easier for them.
Yeah.
And you can file paper forms. That's still completely possible for you to do that.
Mhm.
Like I said earlier, fillable PDFs, I don't think you even need to take it out of the browser.
Yeah.
You can just look up the forms, fill them out, and print them out and mail them.
Mhm.
My recommendation is if you're hoping to get a refund, don't file by mail because the IRS is really, really slow at processing paper forms right now.
Mhm.
They're going to get back to you pretty quickly if you electronically file because
Gotcha.
I don't think most of those are going to be seen by a person. They're going to be running through a computer,
Mhm.
and you'll get your refund a lot faster that way.
Nice. Okay.
It will. There aren't really any free programs for business returns,
Mhm.
and that includes individual returns with Schedule C on them.
Mhm.
So you will have to pay a little bit, but it's not necessary for you to go to an in-person CPA anywhere. If you are maybe above the $163,000 threshold where
Mhm.
your deduction starts to phase out, I think maybe that's the point where you should hire a
Yeah.
CPA. I think that's less of a budgetary stretch for you at that point.
Yeah.
But other than that, you can probably trust any of those online filers, and the IRS does have a section where they recommend their preferred filers to you. Also, when it comes to payments, you can go through the IRS website. There's a website called eftps.gov.
Mhm.
Generally want to make sure you're on a .gov website when you're dealing with taxes because there's a potential for identity theft out there.
Got you.
So always look for those .gov websites, and those are generally trusted sources. But you can create a profile on there. You can get information about prior returns that you filed, and you can make payments electronically, and that's the easiest way to pay. You can also be sure that your payment has arrived, and if you mail a check, you can do certified mail with a return receipt, and you can verify that it's been received that way as well.
Wow, this is so much amazing information. You got a question, brother?
Yeah, this is Stratton behind the scenes. We have a question coming in from online from Mark Anderson. He may have tuned in a little bit late. He says, did you talk about how we account for office equipment like computers and printers? And what about music gear? How do we work with that?
Most gear is going to be under what they call the de minimis threshold. And anything under $2,500, you can directly expense. You don't have to do what they call capitalizing that equipment. If you have some high dollar equipment, what you would do is you would depreciate that. Another thing that's working in everybody's favor right now is depreciation has been accelerated by the IRS. And right now, if you buy new equipment, you can depreciate that all in the first year with bonus depreciation. So that's pretty helpful right now. That rule's not around forever.
Yeah.
But you can do that right now, and instead of getting that benefit over the next 5 years or so, you'll get it on the first year.
Wow, that's like I said, like this is amazing. Honestly, I mean, those of you that who know me, I'm definitely down to talk. But it's like just hearing so much information from you, I'm just so intrigued to hear all this different things. So, is there anything else that you would like to make sure that independent musicians know about their taxes just before, just in case if we don't have any other questions online? Is there anything else that you would like to leave with the people on what they need to know in order for them to file their taxes correctly?
Yeah, I'll say one thing about profit versus loss. So the IRS unfortunately says you have to make money or it's a hobby. You can't deduct any losses for a hobby. You have no deductions for that. So if you're not really trying to be a professional musician, then this may not be something that you want to file as. So keep that in mind. This is definitely geared toward people who are doing this as a profession. That doesn't mean if you're doing it as a hobby and making money, you can't put it on there. But it's definitely not an opportunity to put a bunch of deductions on there and have a loss for your hobby, because the IRS is going to call you on that, and you'll end up paying some taxes.
Got you. Well, I guess before I even let you go, now that you even said that, so what would, I guess in your either opinion, professional opinion, what would qualify someone or, a hobby and a profession per se? I know some people still do make money per se, but what would qualify them to say, hey, this is what I want to take this step forward to file this for my taxes and whatnot?
It doesn't have to be your main thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be a side job and still be a business for you,
Mm-hmm.
still be a profession for you. And ultimately it comes down to whether or not you're actually able to make a profit.
Got you.
And that's pretty much what the IRS says as well.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you so much, Reed. I mean,
Thank you.
This information has been amazing. And of course, this information will be on the Facebook page. It will be on the SoundCorps website. So be sure, if you want any other information about just the business aspects about being an independent musician, be sure to check out some more of our resources available at soundcorps.org. And thank you so much for tuning in.